I always thought my daughter's wedding would be the happiest day of my life. A day of celebration, of joyful tears, the culmination of a life spent raising a good person. But instead, it became the most painful. It happened in a beautiful old church with sunlight filtering through stained glass saints, in front of 200 people who had known us our whole lives. It happened when my own daughter, my Clara, used her wedding vows not to celebrate her new life, but to publicly, methodically, and cruelly erase me from her old one. Before we continue to the story, if you believe in the power of kindness and standing up for what's right, subscribe and share this story. And in the comments below, tell us about a time someone stood up for you, because those are the moments that truly define us. The church was a fairy tale, a stone cathedral with soaring arches and lilies scenting the air, all paid for with my blood, sweat and tears. My daughter Clara looked like a storybook princess in a gown that cost more than my car, a gown I'd worked double shifts for 6 months at the diner to help buy. Every extra hour on my feet, every aching muscle, I had pictured this exact moment. Seeing her radiance, I felt a pride so fierce it was a physical ache in my chest. This was for every sacrifice. For every night I came home too tired to eat, for every bill I juggled, for every moment of loneliness. This was the payoff. I smoothed down my simple navy blue dress, the nicest thing I owned, and felt a tear of pure joy trace a path down my cheek. Then the moment came. The organ music softened to a reverent hum. The officiant, a kind-faced man, smiled and asked for the vows. Clara turned, and my heart swelled. But she didn't turn to her handsome groom, James. She turned to his wealthy parents, Patricia and Richard DuPont, who sat in the front pew like royalty, radiating an aura of polished, effortless superiority. With a perfectly manicured hand placed dramatically on her heart, Clara began. "First," she said, her voice clear and practiced, "I have to thank the people who truly raised me, who showed me what a real family is." My smile froze on my face. It felt brittle, like a piece of glass about to shatter. My hands, which had been loosely clasped in my lap, tightened until the knuckles were white. I was waiting for the thank you I had spent 26 years earning, the acknowledgement that would make it all worthwhile. But her eyes, the same eyes I had gazed into as I rocked her to sleep, swept right past me as if I were a stranger, a piece of the church's architecture. They landed on the DuPonts. "Patricia, Richard," she said, her voice dripping with a carefully rehearsed emotion. "From the moment James brought me into your world, you welcomed me. You showed me what it means to have a life filled with culture and travel and grace. You taught me about art and fine wine, and the importance of a legacy. You've been the parents I always dreamed of having." The words were not just an insult. They were a physical blow. A collective, shocked gasp rippled through the pews. I could feel the eyes of our neighbors, my friends, my co-workers, all turning towards me. My ears began to ring, a high-pitched siren that drowned out everything but the frantic, panicked beating of my own heart. She had just disowned me. In front of everyone we knew, in the dress I helped pay for, my daughter had wiped out 26 years of my life with a single, brutal, and public declaration. My world, which had been built entirely around her, fractured into a million pieces. And in that moment of absolute soul-crushing humiliation, the man she had just married did something that nobody, least of all me, ever saw coming. As she stood there at the altar, bathed in golden light and radiating a happiness that had nothing to do with me, the fancy church and its silent, staring saints faded away. My mind flew back in time, not to a place of culture and grace, but to our cramped 2-bedroom apartment, the one with appealing paint on the windowsills and the second-hand furniture I'd reupholstered myself. It was a world away from the DuPont's mansion, but it was our world. And in that world I was everything to her. Clara's father, a man I once thought I'd grow old with, walked out when she was 4. He packed a single duffel bag, looked at me with empty eyes, and said words I'll never forget. "I wasn't built for this, Helen. The bills, the crying. I just can't." He left me with a mountain of debt and a little girl with his same brown eyes, asking in a tiny voice, "Where did Daddy go?" That day, as I held her sobbing body, I made a silent, sacred vow. I swore to her that she would never feel his absence. I would be her mother and her father. I would be enough. Enough cost me everything. My youth, my dreams, my very self. I worked 2 jobs, then 3 when the landlord raised the rent. I was Helen the waitress, smiling through bone-deep exhaustion, my hair and clothes perpetually smelling of bacon grease and stale coffee. I was Helen the cleaner, vacuuming vast, empty office buildings late at night while my mind raced, endlessly calculating rent, utilities, field trip fees, and the ever-present cost of ballet lessons. I was Helen the bookkeeper, staring at spreadsheets on weekends until my eyes burned and the numbers blurred together, all while Clara slept soundly in the next room. I was a ghost in my own life, my only purpose to fuel hers. Every penny was for her. Every decision revolved around her. When she was 10, she came home with a permission slip, her eyes shining. She wanted to join a traveling soccer team. The fees were $500. It might as well have been $5 million. I didn't have it. My heart broke as I pictured telling her no. That night, after she was asleep, I sat at our small kitchen table and opened my jewelry box. Inside lay the only valuable thing I owned. My grandmother's gold locket, a delicate hand-engraved piece that held tiny pictures of my own parents. The next morning, with tears in my eyes, I walked into a pawn shop and walked out with $500 in crumpled bills. The joyous, ear-splitting scream she let out when I told her she could join was, for a time, worth more than all the gold in the world. She never asked where the money came from. She just took it, as she always did, as her due. That was the pattern of our life. My sacrifices were the invisible foundation upon which all her dreams were built. There were the countless nights I stayed up until 3 a.m. helping her glue together a diorama for a school project, only to wake up 2 hours later for my opening shift at the diner. There was the brutal winter my thin coat wasn't enough and my shoes had holes that let the slush seep in. Also she could have the expensive, fashionable boots all her friends were wearing. I told her mine were just fine. A lie that tasted like bitter cold. When she chose a private university I knew I couldn't possibly afford, I didn't hesitate. I saw it as the final push, the launch pad that would send her into a better life. I took a second mortgage on our tiny house, the house I had fought tooth and nail to keep after her father left. I sold my beat-up but reliable car and started taking the bus, a change that added 2 grueling hours of travel to my already exhausting days. Standing at the bus stop in the freezing rain, watching luxury cars glide by, I would just picture her walking across that campus, and it felt worth it. When she brought James home for the first time, I was so relieved. He had a kind smile that reached his eyes, and he looked me in the eye when he spoke. He came from money, that was obvious from his clothes and the car he drove, but he didn't seem to have the arrogance of his parents. Patricia and Richard DuPont were another story. The first time they came to my house for dinner, I saw Patricia's eyes cataloging every flaw, the worn armchair, the chipped paint on the doorframe. They looked at my calloused hands, the result of a lifetime of labor, and then at my simple department store dress, and they dismissed me. In their world of manicured nails and designer labels, I was the before picture. They saw themselves as Clara's glorious after. I saw the change in Clara almost immediately. It was subtle at first. She started correcting the way I spoke, a gentle, "Mom, it's whom, not who." Then she'd wrinkle her nose at the food I cooked, the same pot roast and mashed potatoes she used to call her favorite meal. She started using words I'd never heard from her before, calling her childhood simple and lacking. They were words she'd clearly borrowed from the DuPont's lexicon. Each one was a small sting, a tiny betrayal. I had wanted her to have more, to reach higher. I just never imagined that having more would mean wanting less of me. The wedding planning made it brutally obvious. My opinions were politely ignored. My suggestions were deemed quaint or tacky. I was being phased out of my own daughter's life, one condescending decision at a time. But I held on, burying the hurt, telling myself this was just the stress of the wedding. I believed that on her big day, surrounded by family and love, my real Clara, the little girl who used to braid my hair, would come back. I just didn't realize she'd already decided I didn't belong in her new, polished world anymore. Back in the church, the ceremony continued as if a mother's heart hadn't just been publicly shattered. James said his own vows, his eyes locked on Clara, his voice steady and full of love. He was completely unaware that he'd just married a woman capable of such breathtaking cruelty. She said, "I do," her voice ringing with triumphant joy, without a single glance in my direction. There was no remorse, no guilt. Just the smug satisfaction of a transaction completed. I felt myself physically shrinking in the pew. My shoulders hunched. I wanted to become invisible, to dissolve into nothing. I was a ghost at my own daughter's wedding. The reception was held at the DuPont's lavish country club, a place with sprawling green lawns and crystal chandeliers that dripped from the ceiling like frozen tears. My journey to invisibility continued. I found my name, Helen Gable, printed on a small card at table 19. It was tucked into the farthest, darkest corner of the vast ballroom, pressed right up against the swinging double doors of the kitchen. My tablemates were a motley collection of discarded guests. A second cousin of Richard's with a hearing aid that whistled, a young couple from James's office who knew no one, and an elderly aunt who had fallen asleep before the salads arrived. The constant clatter of dishes and the shouted orders of chefs from the kitchen was a relentless, percussive reminder of where I'd been put, with the staff out of sight. From my seat in Siberia, I had a clear, painful view of the head table. It was a long, elevated dais decorated with a mountain of white roses. And there was Clara, laughing, her head thrown back as she listened to something her new husband said. Beside her were Patricia and Richard, looking regal and proud. But it was the detail next to Clara that truly took my breath away. Between Clara and her new mother-in-law Patricia, they had placed a single, empty chair. Later, I overheard the maid of honor explaining it to a guest. It was a symbolic gesture, she gushed, in honor of the mother figure who truly shaped Clara into the woman she is today. The gesture was a clear, public nod to Patricia. The cruelty was so specific, so theatrical it felt like a physical assault. They hadn't just erased me. They had replaced me with an empty chair. Pitying glances from old friends and neighbors felt like tiny daggers. They'd catch my eye from across the room, their faces a mixture of horror and sympathy, then quickly look away, unsure of what to do. What do you say to a woman whose own child just publicly executed her? Their averted eyes only deepened my shame. I stared at the pristine white tablecloth, my mind a swirling vortex of poisonous questions. Was it the worn-out couch? Was it the second-hand car? Was my love not enough to make up for the shame of our poverty? The questions rewrote my past, twisting every loving sacrifice into a foolish mistake. Each memory of my devotion was now tainted with the bitter taste of inadequacy. Then, through the din, I overheard Patricia DuPont's voice, sharp and clear. She was leaning towards a woman at the next table, her tone conspiratorial and condescending. "Clara is a real diamond in the rough," she whispered, loud enough for me to hear. "Such potential. We just need to polish away some of her background." Polish away her background. That's what I was. Not a mother who had given everything. Not a woman who had built a life from scratch. I was a smudge. A piece of grit on their perfect diamond. A background to be polished away and forgotten. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't a youthful mistake from Clara. This was a calculated, strategic campaign to erase me from the narrative. And my daughter was a willing, eager participant. A cold fury, glacial and immense, started to burn in the pit of my stomach, pushing past the overwhelming grief. It was an anger I hadn't felt in years, a protective fire I thought had died out. I remembered my own mother, a strong, no-nonsense woman, telling me on her deathbed, "Never let anyone make you feel small, Helen. You are not small." In that moment something inside me snapped. The shock turned into steel. The humiliation curdled into resolve. I would not hide by the kitchen door and cry into my napkin. I had paid for my place at this wedding with the currency of my entire life. I wasn't going to let them humiliate me in silence. They were about to find out that some backgrounds don't polish away. Some backgrounds burn you back. The clinking of a fork on a crystal glass signaled the beginning of the toasts. First, Richard DuPont stood up, delivering a speech that sounded more like a business merger announcement, full of talk about assets and strengthening the family portfolio. Then, Clara's maid of honor gave a giggly, vapid toast full of inside jokes that left half the room confused. They were polite, predictable, and utterly forgettable. Then James stood up. A different kind of hush fell over the room. He was the groom. This was the main event. "To my beautiful bride, Clara," he began, smiling at her. Clara beamed back, basking in the attention, the picture of bridal perfection. Patricia DuPont smirked, a self-satisfied expression, as if this was all part of her master plan. "But," James continued, and that one simple word changed the entire atmosphere in the ballroom. The air grew tense. "We can't talk about the beautiful flower that Clara has become without honoring the root that gave her life. The root that weathered every storm to make sure she could grow." His head turned, and he scanned the vast room. He looked past the tables of important partners and wealthy friends, his eyes searching the back. And then his gaze found mine. He held it, a direct, unwavering connection across the crowded space. For the first time all night, I didn't feel like a ghost. Felt seen. "I've had the privilege of getting to know Clara's mother, Helen, over the past couple of years," he said, his voice ringing with a sincerity that cut through the superficial chatter. The entire room turned as one to stare at me, the woman in the corner by the kitchen. I felt my face flush, a hot wave of panic and confusion. What was he doing? Beside him, Clara's smile was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. She tugged on his sleeve, a silent, desperate plea. He ignored her. "I want to tell you all a story," James said, his eyes still locked on mine. "About a year ago, when I was at Helen's house, I noticed an old photo of her grandmother wearing a beautiful gold locket. I asked Helen where it was. She told me, without a trace of self-pity or regret, that she had pawned it when Clara was 10. She pawned the most precious thing she owned, a piece of her own history, so her daughter could join a soccer team. Because her daughter's happiness was more valuable to her than her own history." A stunned, absolute silence filled the ballroom. My most private sacrifice, a memory I had buried deep, was now public knowledge. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the faces staring at me. But for the first time that day, they weren't tears of humiliation. They were tears of validation. James wasn't finished. His voice grew stronger, filled with a righteous anger. "I've heard a lot of talk tonight about backgrounds, about being polished. But let me tell you what Clara's real background is. It's a mother who worked 3 jobs so her daughter wouldn't feel the sting of poverty. It's a mother who wore shoes with holes in the winter so her daughter could have new boots. It's a mother who took the bus in the rain so her daughter could get an education that would lead her to a world that, apparently, now looks down on that very sacrifice." He turned his gaze to his own parents, his expression hardening. "Mom, Dad, you taught me the value of $1. Helen taught Clara the value of a person. Money doesn't raise a child. Love does. Hard work does. Sacrifice does." Finally, he turned back to his bride. "My daughter." Her face was as white as her dress, her lipstick a slash of garish red against her pale skin. "Clara," James said, and his voice softened, but it held a new, firm edge. "In your vows, you thanked the people who truly raised you. But the woman who truly raised you, who went without so you could have everything, the woman who is the entire reason you are standing here today, is sitting at table 19. And she has not been honored today." He lifted his champagne flute high, a beacon in the dim light. "So I will. I propose a toast. To Helen Gable. Thank you for your daughter. Thank you for everything you've done. You are a woman of incredible strength and dignity. And I am the proudest man in the world to finally call you my mother-in-law." For a long moment, there was absolute ringing silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. James just stood there, his arm outstretched, his glass held high in a solitary salute. Then, from the middle of the room, someone started to clap. It wasn't polite applause. It was a single, slow, deliberate clap. I saw it was my old neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. Then another person joined, and another, until the applause grew from a ripple into a thunderous, rolling ovation that shook the ballroom. It was a wave of sound, of support, of acknowledgement. It wasn't just for James. It was for me. My eyes shot to the head table. Patricia's face was a mask of cold fury, her jaw tight. Richard was staring intently at his dessert plate as if it held the secrets of the universe. But my eyes were on Clara. Tears of pure, unadulterated shame were streaming down her face, carving black tracks through her perfect makeup. "James, what are you doing?" she whispered, a broken, horrified plea that he was clearly meant to hear, yet he ignored it. He gently took her hand, the one that had been clutching his sleeve, and set it down on the table. It was a quiet, simple, but unmistakably final gesture. Then he did the unthinkable. He walked away from the head table, away from his bride, away from his parents, and headed directly toward me. The shame was no longer mine. It had been lifted from my shoulders and delivered, with devastating precision, back to its rightful owner. I was no longer the embarrassing mother hidden in the corner. I was the woman of strength and dignity my son-in-law had toasted. My own tears were falling freely now, hot and cleansing. They weren't tears of sadness, but of pure catharsis. A crushing weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying, the weight of 26 years of being taken for granted, had been lifted from my soul. James reached table 19. The few people at my table scrambled to their feet. He walked directly to my chair and right there in his $1,000 tuxedo, in front of 200 stunned guests, he knelt on the floor. He took my worn, calloused hands, the hands that had scrubbed floors and packed lunches and written checks, into his own soft ones. He looked up at me, his eyes full of a kindness and respect I had been starved for, and gave my hands a gentle, reassuring squeeze. That simple, profound gesture undid me. I began to sob, releasing all the pain of the day, of the year, of a lifetime, until the raging storm inside me finally, blessedly, passed. Later that evening, after the applause had faded and a strained, awkward music had resumed, James found me on a quiet, moonlit terrace overlooking the golf course. The party inside had become an unbearable charade. "I'm sorry if I embarrassed you, Helen," he said softly, his voice full of genuine concern. I turned to him, this man who had been a relative stranger just hours before, and was now my defender. "Embarrassed me," I said, a small, wet laugh escaping my lips. "James, you didn't embarrass me. You saved me. You gave me back my dignity when my own daughter tried to steal it." He nodded, looking out at the darkness. "Family stands up for family," he said simply. "When I fell in love with Clara, I fell in love with her whole story. And you're the best part of that story. That includes you. Always." He gave me a real, comforting hug, the kind I hadn't received in years, and I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't felt all day in that glittering, hostile ballroom. As the night was winding down, Clara approached me near the exit. Her face was blotchy and swollen, her fairy tale gown looking more like a costume. "Mom," she started, her voice thick with tears. "I am so sorry. It was Patricia, she got in my head. She said we needed to establish my new life and..." I held up a hand, a gesture that silenced her stream of excuses. The old Helen, the doormat Helen, would have folded instantly. She would have hugged her and said, "It's okay, sweetheart," absorbing the pain as she always had. But I was different now. James's speech hadn't just vindicated me. It had awakened me. "Clara," I said, my voice quiet but firm, forged in the fire of that day's pain. "We will talk about this. But not tonight. Tonight is your wedding night. You should be with your husband, the man who just taught you a lesson in character, loyalty, and love that I, apparently, failed to." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. For a split second, I saw the little girl who just wanted her mother to make it all better. But the wound was too deep, too raw. I couldn't fix it for her this time. This was a consequence she needed to own, to sit with, to understand. She just nodded meekly, the arrogance gone, and walked away. I didn't lose a daughter that day. In truth, I realized I'd been slowly losing her for years, to envy, to ambition, to the poisonous idea that where you're going matters more than where you came from. That day, my daughter broke my heart into pieces. But my son-in-law, in one unforgettable act of courage, painstakingly put it back together. He showed me that true family isn't just about blood. It's about who stands up for you when you're alone. It's about who sees your worth when you've forgotten it yourself. That day, I may have seen the very worst in my daughter, but I also saw the very best in the man she married. And in a strange, painful, beautiful way, my family grew.